Welcome to another rousing episode of the podcast Unraveling Intellectual Property with Michael Stein. Today, I have one of my esteemed colleagues, a fellow attorney, lots of experience, Mr. Marc Whipple. Marc, please tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, etc.
Hi. I started my career after law school as the general counsel of a design studio that invented things to license. Then I moved to be the general counsel of a very large video game and intellectual property creating company, where I spent several years there. And then I went into private practice and eventually ended up teaming up with Stein, one of the best firms I've ever worked with, of course. And I specialize in things that interest businesses who also have a lot of intellectual property, patents, copyrights, trademarks, but also licensing and related subjects.
All right, that's pretty impressive, and we're so glad to have you as part of Stein IP. Today, I'd like to discuss startups and in particular, initially, what are some of the issues? And I know we're going to cover intellectual property as part of that and probably the focus, but what are some issues that startups should consider at the beginning phases?
Well, when everybody's excited about starting up and everybody's moving in the same direction, that is the time to set up things like membership agreements or operating agreements or bylaws for if you incorporate, whatever your form factor is, you should start one. Because if you don't, your state will start one for you. It's called a general partnership and it comes into operation automatically. And it is the worst form of corporate entity. You don't want that. So at the very least, set up an LLC. Incorporation is also an option, but for most startups, I would start with an LLC. It's much cheaper and gives you pretty much the same protection at your size. Corporations are mostly about divvying up big money, which, you can always switch to a corporation when you hit it. So anyway, you set it up and you set up your operating agreement, who owns what, who is responsible for what, who's put in money. If people put in money, it needs to be documented because, it can all turn ugly later. And I have sadly seen more than one startup be very successful. And then when the money's rolling in and everybody feels like they're the ones who did everything, they feel like they should get more than what everybody else thinks is their share. So do it now while everybody's friendly. That is big, important thing, number one. Number two, of course, you want to make sure that you're in compliance with your local laws. If you need a business license, if you need operating license, if you're making stuff, anything like that. And of course, also set up with HR and a payroll system if you're going to have employees, because you don't want to be scrambling to figure that out in a year when you have to file your tax returns. Also, don't forget to file your tax returns. So those are the big things business wise. Do your paperwork. That's the
And,
bottom line.
and then maybe it's very fact specific, but even deciding what state to incorporate in, what are some of the factors that might go into that?
That is an excellent question. The two real options that I would say 90% of startups have are incorporate in your state of operation, which could be bad or good, but it is at least simple, or incorporate in one of the states that specialize in incorporating foreign corporations. And when we say a foreign corporation, we mean a corporation that isn't incorporated in the state where it does most of its business. They're also called by old people like me alien corporations. It just means that you're not in the state where you incorporated. And that's fine. Most corporations are not in the state where they incorporated. Traditionally, it was Delaware that you looked at. However, there have been some very, I'm going to just say, strange court decisions based on a judge who seems to have it in for Elon Musk.
It's interesting you mentioned that because I literally saw an article yesterday about how Delaware is losing its premier status. But go ahead.
So Delaware is still an option, but certainly consult with an attorney if you want to do Delaware because things are in a bit of flux there. The other two big ones are Nevada and Texas, both of which have pretty de minimis uh, incorporation routines. The prices are reasonable, and they don't necessarily reach out and try to get tax from you. Maryland, for instance, where I believe Michael does a lot of practice, I believe they still have an inventory tax, basically. So you still have to pay them taxes even if you don't have any money, if you own pretty much anything. Which may be bad or good. It's not necessarily the end of the world. But if you're not going to incorporate in one of the big three, then you should definitely consult an attorney and make sure that you're not going to be exposed to any tax liabilities or audit liabilities that might be a problem. I mean, of course, our position as lawyers is everybody should pay their taxes and file their returns, but our position as lawyers is that you only have to pay the taxes you're required to pay. So make sure that you minimize that.
But let's say you're an alien corporation. Do the states impose any limitations, or anyone can sign up and they I assume they get their few $100 or whatever fee they get for that privilege?
That's an excellent question. The one downside of that is you may have to file tax. Well, there's two downsides. They're related. First, you may have to file tax returns in at least two states. Again, that's a job for your tax advisor. As a business attorney, I know just enough tax law to know when I see a tax issue to tell them go find a tax lawyer or an accountant. And most lawyers are the same. That is a specialized practice, like some of the ones that we do at Stein. And it's just not something that most attorneys are fully up to speed with because it changes constantly. And the second thing is you may need to register in the state where you do all your business as a foreign corporation. It's
Uh,
usually a form that you fill out. There's a small fee. It's just to let them know that you are present in the state, and that what they're really concerned about is if you do something wrong, they know where to find you. You're providing them with service address. So if you are allegedly violating a regulation or you cause a tort and somebody gets hurt, then the state knows where you are and how to serve you with process. That's what they really want that for. Do a lot of people skip it? Yes, they do. Should they skip it? No, because if there is an issue, God forbid, then you can have some issues with the state claiming that you weren't properly registered, and you could be looking at some fines. It's not the end of the world, but certainly if your state requires it, and many do, be sure to file it. Again, your local attorney will know this. We're all familiar with our own jurisdictions as to who has to file and who doesn't.
I guess depending on whether it's an LLC or a corporation, that depends on whether you need annual minutes and an annual meeting. I assume a corporation has more requirements than an LLC.
Absolutely true. The corporation is going to be more work to file and more work to maintain. It fits into a lot of larger puzzle pieces, so to speak, better, especially if you have a lot of investors or you have some investors who are investing serious money. Um, a lot of venture capitalists, especially on the West Coast, are very informal. They're like, oh, just set up a little LLC, we'll fix it later. If you're taking in serious money, if any one investor is putting in more than $100,000, certainly is just a ballpark figure, you should strongly consider corporations so that you can issue proper shares. If LLCs have membership percentages, which are very like shares, but not quite as legally sound. So that is a decision for you. But if you're bringing in big money, you certainly should look at incorporation rather than LLC.
And I guess I mean, going back to talking to the accountant, tax consequences on where you incorporate.
Very much so. You will almost certainly have to file a return in the state where you incorporate. If you file in one of the big three, it will be mostly filled with zeros because they don't necessarily charge you tax, but they will probably expect a state return. And then you will definitely need to file in the state where you do most of your business as an operating entity. And you usually, not always, but usually, alien corporations get treated exactly like natural corporations as far as taxation, regulation, things like that. They know they don't want to scare off the larger corporations that may not be incorporated in the state by treating them differently. So that it shouldn't be a problem. But again, that is very much an ask your accountant kind of question.
All right, there's clearly a lot to consider, I guess especially at the beginning part of the process.
Yes.
Uh, Aside from intellectual property, are there any other, I mean, I know there's a myriad, but any of the biggies I'm guessing things like insurance, I know even as a law firm, I have professional liability, and I guess it depends whether you're a professional corporation or slip and fall, and someone breaks their arm, whether it's a third party or one of your employees, and uh, a whole host of other types of insurance, etc.
The two big things to think about there are number one, premises safety. If you do have premises, and it could be just an office in your house, but especially if other people come there, uh, liability insurance is a big one. Yes, you don't
Oh,
want anybody
actually,
slipping.
Mark, now that I answered that question, I believe that we're going to have another podcast on Insurance. So why don't we save that for another podcast and give people something to look forward to?
Sounds like
Okay.
a great idea. And then the other thing is, again, make sure you're registered properly. Make sure you file your annual reports, which a lot of people forget. They will eventually, it takes a while, declare your corporation void if you don't file your annual reports. In all states that I know of, require at least a minimal annual filing. Because of course they want to keep track. They don't want dead corporations on their books, and they want to get their little fees because it helps pay for everything.
All right. Thanks, Mark, for that. Now let's get to the intellectual property issues.